Facebook. It's Kamal Fernandez here from Kamal Fernandez Dog Training. Oh, I'm just a bit close to the camera there. Just going to tilt that back a bit. That's better. Okay, let's just make sure I'm coming out live. Hopefully I am. Always like to double check these things just in case before I start chatting away. Excellent. Okay. Coming out live. So firstly, thank you those of you that have signed up for the OTT webinar and the Annoyingly Adolescent webinars that are happening tomorrow and Friday. So those of you that are attending the Annoyingly Adolescent webinar tomorrow, you should have received the link for the webinar, the Zoom webinar, in via email. The email you registered your account with, or your subscription with, you would have had it sent to that. If you haven't as yet received that email, just send me a message or email me, and I will sort out you getting that link. But as I said, it was sent out last night, so excuse me, hopefully everybody's received that by now. If you haven't, just as I said, reach out to me and I will make sure that you get that email. So the OTT No More webinar link will be sent out later on this evening. So there's still time for people to sign up for the webinar. Sign-ups for tomorrow's webinar will stop at, I think it's 3 p.m. and sign up for the OTT No More webinar on Friday will stop at 4 p.m. So plenty of time to sign up if you're interested. All those that sign up for the webinar will receive a recording of the webinar. That's it. Will receive a recording of the webinar probably about 5 to 7 days after the webinar. So just be patient with me whilst I get that sorted. Normally I get it out quicker than that, but I always give people that time span just so they're not sort of disappointed if they get it within, say, 5 days and I get it out earlier. Okay, so thank you, as I said, for those of you that have signed up. There's a huge amount of interest, which is great. As I mentioned previously in my lives, sign-ups for several of my online courses are going to be open from next week, including the OTT No More Facebook group and course that's currently running. We're several months in now, and the group has been fantastic in what they've been working on with their dogs. Some real aha moments and real progress from the dogs within that course. And the handlers, absolutely amazing group of people that are working super hard. And if you want to be part of that, you can find out how to sign up next week. Also, my other courses, Obedience Fanatics and Relabeling Reactivity, are being opened up as well next week. So if you want to sign up for any of those courses, keep an eye on your emails and my Facebook page for more details. So today's live is continuing the conversation about frustration and more about how to use it as an asset in our training and how to incorporate it in a healthy manner with your dog. So in my previous live discussing frustration, I talked about the 4 contributing factors towards dogs getting frustrated. And if you didn't get a chance to have a look at that live, check out my Facebook page. It will be on there if you want to have a look at that, all right? So just to recap some of those points, the first one was communication. That can largely contribute to frustration if there is a lack of communication or miscommunication between the human and the dog, or the dog to the human. Either way, the dog isn't being read appropriately, and the information the dog is presenting isn't being read by the handler or the owner or the trainer, and that can cause frustration. And the same way, if the handler isn't communicating the information properly to the dog, that can also contribute to frustration. So both those points can definitely contribute to frustration. The best way to remedy that is to video your training sessions so that you can see and evaluate and begin to train your eye and develop understanding about what could be contributing to your dog's frustration. Always think about the ABCs of training, which is the antecedent, behavior, and consequence, to help your dog help reduce frustration in your training, both from your end and the dog's end, okay? Second point is threshold awareness. knowing what the point of where your dog is getting frustrated and how to alleviate that, or to bear with me. Oh, yes, okay. Sorry, I just think the comments popped up there. So think about how you can developing your awareness of your dog's threshold of frustration. Some dogs, that threshold of frustration is lower than others. Certainly for a lot of dogs that are bred for sports, and I'll be releasing a blog later on to discuss this point, certainly are showing a very low threshold to frustration. So slightest bit of frustration and that dog gets really over aroused, overstimulated, can vocalize, can redirect, can show aggression, can show loads of behavioral signs that can be challenging, or behavioral traits, or exhibit behaviors that can be challenging, I should say. So it's really, and that's largely the misconception between drive and arousal, and dogs are being designed, for want of a better word, to be highly aroused as opposed to being highly driven. And the two things, there's a distinct lack of understanding. Okay. Third point is frustration inoculation, which I'm going to go into greater detail today. Preparing your dog to deal with frustration in a healthy manner. I equate that to physical exercise, where you expose your body to a little bit of stress to allow your body to adjust, and you become stronger for it. The same way for your dogs, you can inoculate their temperament and their understanding against frustration, and use frustration in appropriate dosages so that your dog can become resilient and have the cognitive ability to work through frustration in a healthy manner. The fourth contributing factor to frustration is premature arousal addiction, which in short means that your dog is being exposed, or the dog is frustrated before it has the necessary skills or understanding to navigate the challenges that you're presenting with them, or overcome the environment and the challenges the environment may present, or the lesson that you're imposing on them. The dog is finding it too much for their skill set at that time, and therefore the dog gets frustrated, and then it explodes or implodes depending on the dog's temperament, and that can result in the dog getting really, really overstimulated and become problematic for the handler and the dog. So that's a very quick rundown of the points. Simon says hair looks good. Well, I do try, Simon. Those points were covered in greater detail in my previous webinar, live, I should say. But today we're going to expand a little bit more about how we can use frustration as an asset to train our dogs, and to improve performance, and two, from a behavioral point of view, how to help your dog navigate life in a healthy manner. So from a sports perspective, there's definitely a conversation and part that we need to consider, and that is, when you approach training your dog for sports, you're going to be training two dogs simultaneously, and you're going to have two competing personalities. Okay, now that sounds a bit contradictory. I didn't buy Littermates, Kamal Fernandez, but hey ho. So let me expand on that point a little bit more. So when you're training a dog for sports specifically, you are training two dogs simultaneously. The dog that you can take into the sporting venue, arena, environment, situation, ring, whatever, and you're training the dog that can live the day-to-day life with you, and can be taken to those environments and be calm, and be well behaved, and be thoughtful, and can be whatever the terms that you calm, obedient, whatever you want to call it. The dog that you can walk around a dog show, and the dog that or a dog competition, a trial or competition, and the dog that you can take onto the competitive field, arena, ring, and be successful. And they're two dogs that you need to be training simultaneously. So the dog that you take into the competition arena, you want that dog to give you 150%. You want it to be committed. You want the dog to be focused. You want the dog to be 100% intent on you. And that means using the dog's drive and possibly creating arousal. Again, that's another topic of conversation, but certainly building the dog's drive so that it wants to do the task that you're asking it to perform. Whether it be an obedience dog, or an agility dog, or an IGP dog, or a working trials dog, or flyball, doesn't matter. You are looking for the dog to be at be able to give 100% of itself. That means using reinforcement, using motivators, toys, food, um, physical play, external reinforcement to build the dog's desire to do tasks that you're asking of it. That can be contradictory to things that we want our dog to do in those environments when they're not participating. For example, not get over aroused by watching other dogs, to show impulse control, to show self-control, not to pull on the lead, not to vocalize. So those things can be contradictory to the dog that we're building for competition, okay? And it's really important that we understand and we build in definite clarity between the dog that we take on the field and the dog that we have off the field. A simple trigger that you can use is to teach your dog either a verbal cue that says to the dog, we are on duty and we are competing and I need you to be 100% focused, and a cue that says to the dog, we're done, you don't need to be engaged in me, you can chill out in this environment, and so forth and so forth. So my dogs are taught that principle, and they're taught two cues. One is a switch on word and the other is a switch off word. And my switch on cue for my dogs is ready, steady, and my switch off cue for my dogs is that'll do. So when I say to them that'll do, that means that they are no longer required to give me their undivided attention and ignore the environment and to be super focused, because reinforcement for sports related behaviors are on offer. When I say that'll do, that means they can engage with the environment, look away from me, but there is still criteria in how they engage in day-to-day life. So it's critically important that my dogs understand the two things. And for example, my puppy Swipe is learning that skill. He is a dog that is constantly on. He wants to do all the time, and he needs to learn over time that there is distinct periods when I don't want him to be pressing me or pushing me to try and engage or interact, or bringing me toys to try and instigate some training or interaction. I want him to have a distinct off word. Now that might sound for some of you quite contradictory, but for me it's equally important, especially when you have really, really high drive dogs, that they understand to relax and to just be in environments, and they don't need to be hyper vigilant and really, really overstimulated. The reason being is that when you put a dog that is naturally driven, like a dog like Swipe, who wants to train and work all the time, in an environment where he's been conditioned or classically conditioned to be excited, he's going to get to do all the fun stuff. I'm now adding an already naturally aroused dog into a situation that's going to cause him to be overstimulated and over-aroused. So now I'm creating a dog that is so sky high. I have very little means of connecting with him and him listening to me and focusing. And ideally, in terms of performance, we want the dog to be in the middle of that arousal curve, where they're at their optimum level of performance, where they can still be engaged and animated and focused, but I still want the dog to be in the middle, not under aroused and not over aroused. So it's really important that I create that within my dogs. For me, the simplest way is to teach the dog a distinct on and off cue, okay? Second thing, if your dog is learning that, I would also use what I call uniforms, to distinguish between my dog being engaged for work or training and the dog being off and being allowed to do their own thing and engage with the environment and not necessarily have that intense focus on me. And you can create that very simply by either having a different collar or a different harness versus a collar. So for example, your dog, when it's been in competing mode or trained, you would put it on a flat collar, and when it was being walked around in day-to-day life, you might want to use a harness. Obviously a harness may be a trigger for your dogs, it certainly will be for mine. So with Swipe, with Jungle, I didn't use a harness, because harnesses are going to mean be aroused and be focused for the specific sports that they're being trained for. So I didn't use a harness for those two dogs. What I did do was just use my verbal cue and train the clarity with them both, and I made it very obvious that we were in training mode, and with my body language and the setup and the environment to help them understand. So it's really important that you create that clarity to prevent your dog going to those situations and assuming that they're always going to be needed and be on and creating over arousal. Okay, that can lead to frustration because your dog is going there with a level of expectation, and they're, for want of a better term, disappointed by that, and that gets them frustrated because they're expecting work, and to them it appears as though you're not reinforcing them. The lack of reinforcement can equate to the dog then, vocalizing and barking or offering unwanted behavior in order to incite reinforcement, and so forth and so forth. Okay, so creating the clarity of when you need your dog to be on and off is a huge skill that you can you can incorporate into your training, so that you're training those two dogs, the one that you can live with on a day-to-day basis, and the second dog that you can take into a sport and the dog perform at its best. Okay, second thing that you need to be considered about is the aspect of the two personalities you are nurturing. You are nurturing the dog training personality, the person within you that says, I must be clear with my criteria, my timing must be impeccable, I must be consistent with what I ask of my dog, and so forth and so forth. And then you've got the competitor within you who wants to win the class, and who has that really focused mindset, that who wants to go for the win, and wants to beat your opponents and so forth. And those two things can often, or those two personalities can butt heads. So in a competitive situation, what will often happen where we erode our dog training is we go into a competition environment and we've trained our dog beautifully. The dog has very clear criteria. We've maintained that consistently, and the dog is absolutely black and white about what we want to do. We go to a competition environment, and the possibility of qualifying or winning, etc., becomes in our eye line or in our sights. And we then grade criteria, and we then ultimately create a level of frustration or lack of clarity to the dog, because we've graded the lines between what we do at home and what we do away from home. Very quickly, and dogs are brilliant at picking up and changes of criteria, your dog will pick up on those triggers: the environment, your anxiety, your change in demeanor, your attire, the mass of dogs, the mass of people, the tent, the ring ropes, the trial environment, as triggers to say to them that in those situations, you're going to shift criteria and possibly reinforce less. And in your home environment, you're going to be super black and white and very, very clear. And that can ultimately lead to shifts in the dog's behavior and to frustration, okay, on the part of the dog and the handler. So that's something that you see a lot of people do, where, and I'll hands up, I'll be included in that statement. Yeah, when the competitive part of you comes into the frame, you will allow shifts in criteria. The answer, or the fix to that, is to make sure that you merge the picture between home and training consistently. So that means sometimes doing run-throughs or practice rounds or runs, or putting a whole course up if you're an agility person, or doing a full track, or doing a load of heel work, and allowing subtle shifts in criteria, and complete that chain, or that full run in training, so that when you go to competition, the dog doesn't see that as a differentiation between the two environments. So a great example of that would be, and you need to decide for yourself as the dog trainer what constitutes a major crime, sort of, for a better term, and a minor offence that you're going to say, okay, I'm not going to make a big drama of that. So to give you an example in agility terms, okay, let's just say that your dog in training knocks a bar. Okay, so you know that no matter what happens, you're not going to win if your dog knocks a bar. So you're not going to qualify. You're not going to get a win that allows you to progress. So you know that's quite a black and white thing that you want your dog to understand. And obviously there's a million reasons why dogs can knock bars, but it's very black and white for you and the dog to understand. But your dog doing a wide turn isn't necessarily going to mean that you're not competitive. So if in training, okay, you have a rule that if your dog knocks a bar, you stop and take the dog back, etc. And then when your dog does a wide turn, you stop and bring the dog back and say, no, 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 I need you to jump, tighter. If you go to a competition, those are two things that you may change and create a distinction, a differentiation between your home training and your away training. So what you'd want to do is have a level of consistency and pick out those two issues, which one you're going to be consistent irrespective of the environment, and which one you're going to allow a level of shift, or you're going to now and again allow a criteria shift, or you're going to set the bar of how much you can lower criteria on that specific behavior and continue the run or continue in practice. So to give you a practical example, okay, we're going to choose, and this is a very easy way to explain it. Bar knocking in training and at a competition, we're going to implement a strategy to say to the dog, okay, that's not what we want, and you're going to bring the dog back and redo the jump or repeat the sequence or whatever the case may be. You're going to have a distinct rule. Now, to qualify on that, it may be in that moment you handled badly, hence the dog knocked the bar, or you the dog has got lacking in physical fitness. So there may be other reasons why the dog has knocked the bar. And you would want to be consistent with your decision about what you're going to do. I'm just using this as a simple example to show you the distinction between a major, what you may deem as a major crime that you're going to say, right, no, that gets the behaviours, we stop our training, we go back to the beginning, or we repeat, etc., versus one that's you're going to have a little greyness on. So if we look at that in comparison to the dog jumping a bit wide on a turn, if your dog does that in competition, that's not going to result in you not qualifying. You still may be able to win and be successful, if your dog does a wide turn. It might not be ideally what your dog training head wants, but you're going to allow that slippage. So in training, you would have that rule. Okay, if my dog jumps now and again when I'm doing a little bit of practicing and I'm doing running courses for experience, I'm going to allow the slightly wide turn now and again in training, so that I can allow that same rule to be applied in competition. Okay, you can apply that principle of having major crimes and minor crimes in any sport that you do. So if you look at it from an obedience point of view, if my dog doesn't respond to one of my cues, sit, stand or down, at the high level, that's going to be quite a big points loss, and it's unlikely that I'm going to be competitive. So that may constitute me saying, okay, I'm going to stop my chain, I'm going to go back to the beginning. But my dog doing a slightly off a crooked present, or the dog slightly mouthing the retrieve article is not going to be something that, whilst I might have points lost, it's not going to be something that I'm going to have a zero tolerance on. Okay, so those would be things that I would say, okay, when I'm doing a run through in training to prepare my dog for competition, I'm going to allow the dog, if he sits a bit crooked, I'm going to continue on my chain. But if I say sit and he does another position, I'm going to start that chain back again. So having that awareness of what's going to be a major issue and what's going to be a minor one will help you create clarity in competition. So when you have those two personalities, the competitor and the dog trainer, butting heads, you can decide, depending on your individual journey and your individual training, what you are willing to allow a level of slippage, should we say, and what you're going to have a very distinct black and white rule on. And it's really important that you have that consistency. In agility terms, a very classic issue that people have is broken start lines, but the dog does a brilliant start line in training, and it's ultimately because in competition mode, we've allowed a shifting criteria. There could be other things that your dog has a concern about, the mass of people or dogs or dog barking or tents, and you can train those things, you can incorporate those things into your training to help the dog understand, but ultimately we need to be consistent with what we ask our dogs in home environments versus away environments, okay? So thinking about the two dogs that you're training, the one that you want to live with and the sports dog is really, really important, and simultaneously training both, investing as much into your domestic dog as you do your sports dog. So for me, it's equally important that I can walk my dogs around a dog show and then not be hysterical or dragging me around or always anticipating they're going to be doing something. I want them to be able to, hang out with me. Anybody will see me at dog show. You always see me walking my dogs around the shows. Because I like to get my dogs out. It's a long day for them, especially the ones that aren't competing. And I like to walk them around and hang out with them and, chit chat to people. And I like to have my dogs with me. And it's really important that my dogs have social skills and social etiquette. They're not going to be lunging or barking or screaming or pulling me around. And that's really, really important. So when they're young, I invest as much into that training as I do my sports training. So to give you an example, Swipe was at a dog show this weekend. Part of his thing was to walk around a dog show and do nothing. And just hang out with me and nonchalantly walk around the environment and, look at the dogs and look at the sights and sit and hang out with me for a little bit. And I might have done it at a considerable distance away from the other dogs and people so that he wasn't exposed to anything that I felt he couldn't cope with. Or I was a bit cautious because it was his first proper, has he been? He's now been to a couple of dog shows. But I always try and stay on the periphery, and I pick the moments when I walk him around because he's a fragile age where he's in adolescence, when he might be a little bit more concerned or weary or could develop behavioural issues if I put him in situations that he can't cope with or I can't control. So he's learning at this moment to be at dog shows or competitions and hang out with me, and also simultaneously switch on and engage and do a little bit of training with me. So, I took him around this weekend and I took him to a quiet part of the venue and just interacted with him, played with him, did some very simple behaviours, didn't ask too much. So I'm starting to train him to hopefully be a dog that can switch on in those environments and give me 100% focus. But it's really important that you understand those both, training both those things simultaneously. Using a verbal cue, using a piece of equipment or a uniform as I call it, to create that clarity is a really, really helpful way to explain that to your dog when you need them to be focused and when you don't necessarily need them to be focused. All right, so hopefully that all makes sense. Let's have a look. Let's see if we've got any questions. So let's have a look. Let's have a look. Okay, so all right, let's have a look. Hi Linda. So my good friend Linda Orton Hill's online. Okay, so first question is oh, hang on a second. Could you reinforce your start work cue with, say, a game of tug, as Susan Garrett's suggestion? Absolutely. You could definitely use tug as a way to reinforce your start cue if that's what your dog is motivated by. Some of my dogs, it might be I switch them on, I say the cue, and I might do a food circuit or a food game. So how I initially teach a switch on is I actually use a physical trigger. So I simply do it by sitting in a chair, standing up really, really quickly, and I start to interact with the dog. So the trigger for the dog initially is me standing up in a very abstract way, like bump, stand up, play with the dog. Stand up, food circuit. Stand up, play with the dog. Once I can see my dog reading that bolt stand up as a predictor to say, oh, that dad's going to start engaging with me, I would then say my cue just before I stood up. So it's ready, steady, stand up, play with the dog. Ready, steady, stand up, play with the dog. Okay? Once the dog understands that, then I can fade the standing up out of the equation. I would stand up, and if the dog showed animation, I just ignore it and I might even do it around the house. Stand up, abruptly, go to the toilet, stand up, put the kettle on. So the dog then gets the physical cue is untrained and it's now on a verbal. What I'm looking for is my dog to have that instantaneous switch on, which means that they can be super animated and super aroused, and they can be, focused and all that sexy stuff. But when I don't say that, they can, be, hang out, look at the environment, sniff the ground, doesn't matter. So obviously there is the overriding way in which I live my life with my dogs, i.e. training a really solid recall, leash lead walking, all that stuff. Those are my domestic house, living with pet dog, whatever you want to term you want to refer it to, and my ready, steady, and switch on is refined or saved for my sports training. All right, so hopefully that makes sense to you. Okay, I play good games with my. Oh, hang on a second. Let me just review this. So, I play good games with my dog in the queue, but I wonder if it winds him up even more because he knows what's going to happen. Possibly. So, I also dabble in agility. I think it's very cultural that people use tugging a lot with their dogs, and it seems to be, one size fits all in a lot of instances, that your dog must at all tugging is the way forward, and my dogs tug, and I'm a great believer in tugging and nurturing tug, but you need to decide for yourself based on your dog on whether a tugging is appropriate for that dog in that moment. So I'm going to give you a great example because it's very relevant for one of my dogs that I'm competing with. He's a young border collie called Kinder. He's 3 years old. I bred him by the dog that I qualified for Crufts, Gurley, her sister, and a very, very, very driven dog called Razzie, which a very good friend of mine owned, who was an absolute powerhouse. And that litter have all got really, really sound temperaments, but they're incredibly driven as a litter, I'd say. Or he's certainly very driven, and he's very, very motivated by toys. And I would get, one of the things that we've had to do a lot with him is to teach him to think in heightened states of arousal and to think in the presence of toys, because that was not something that he could do easily as a youngster. So when I take him in to do training rounds, which is what we're allowed to do in the UK in obedience, where I can take reinforcement in the ring, it's very counterproductive to do too much playing and tugging with him, because what happens is he then starts to see the ring as a place where he can get very, very aroused, which then pushes the scale over to where he gets really, really pushy, and he's very, very naturally driven. So my warm-up with him would be primarily food, and ideally what I would do is I would click the dog and I would take him out of the ring and feed him, and use a lower level of a lower value reinforcement for him. And if I did play with him, it wouldn't be tugging, it would be give him the ball, good boy, release the ball, carry on with what I'm doing. There wouldn't be any manic tugging, because he's such an intense dog on tugging, it just gets him too sky high. So you need to adjust your tugging for what's appropriate to the dog, and don't be afraid to taper it. A lot of dogs, for example, Jungle's the same. I wouldn't do too much tugging and manic tugging with her when I'm in a training sense, because I want her to be more thoughtful and I want her to be thinking. So I would use tugging intermittently at pivotal points in my training session, but not as we're going to use tugging and that's all we use, because what happens is you bring the dog's drive up to the point, or the dog's level of arousal, so much that you're now battling another issue. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, let's have a look. Oh gosh, I've just lost more questions here. Okay, let's have a look. Okay, Rachel Flesh, a quick question. Have you got any puppy workshops coming to August, September, time up north? Asking for a friend. So I have got seminars in September, but I don't think they're up north. So September and August are generally more, I'm competing a lot. I have got my camp in August, my week's camp in August, my summer camp, which is always a great fun. And I have got a couple of seminars, but not up north. September I think I have, but the best thing is if you send me a message and I can give you some details of where I will be later on this year. All right? Let's have a look. Okay, Caroline. Oh, no, that's okay. Louise Gray. I'd love to hear more about the switch off cue. Struggling to transition Gray off in crate, etc. whilst waiting in rep in class. She'll vocalize an action prompt. Okay, so classic thing that people do is before the dog has the skill set of knowing a really strong on cue, they try and simultaneously work their off skills. Okay, so that sounds a bit gobbledygook. So let me explain. So the way in which I initially train my dogs to have an off cue is actually it's the first thing I train, ironically enough. So I take my little puppy to somewhere. I do it specifically at a place where I walk my dogs because as you enter the gate, there's a really great little wooded section as you before you go to the more open area, and it's always there's loads of like interesting smells, and there'll be loads of rabbits and pheasants all have been there, and foxes and badgers. So there's and probably some sheep and deer. So there's loads of great things for my puppy to be naturally curious to, or my young dog. So what I do with my puppies is I'll take them to that place and I'll actually teach them that off cue. So I might, if my puppy was really like Swipe was quite handler focused, so he was reluctant to engage with the environment. So what I used to do with him was go out prior to getting him out the van, scatter some treats in that location, get him out the van, and I'd say that'll do, and I'd let him pop them on the floor, and he'd go and oh look, there's treats on the floor. So I'd actually actively cause him to engage with the environment. I wouldn't do that necessarily have to do that with all dogs, but what I want them to do is understand that'll do means you can go off and be on your free time. Now I might intermittently recall him and give him some treats and then encourage him to go off again. A couple of things when you teach your off cue is unless I'm doing something like a recall, if my dog came back and persisted and tried to offer attention or engagement, I wouldn't reinforce it. If my dog came up and like what Swipe used to do was try and pick up things and bring them to me to get him to interact with him, I would, he could have them. I wasn't bothered by just ignore him. I want him to have the clarity of going, I don't need you at this moment in time, because of the way because of his personality and how intense he is. So I teach the off cue first, and when I'm taking young dogs to or when I have people with puppies in class, I always advise them do bits with their puppy, take the puppy out. And don't put it in that situation until you've worked on the puppy being able to be in a crate and not assume they're going to do some training, especially your really more high drive dogs. So certainly in my competition class, it's very much like what we would do is get the puppies would be done first. They'd put the puppy out, give it a Kong. The puppy would probably sleep for a little while. We'd do the rest of the class. Then they do another little bit with the puppy. Great, and if the puppy had a little bit, we might get in one more little session, but maybe the puppy initially might just be 2 little tiny sessions, and with rest periods in between, because puppies need a lot of sleep. So once I've got that established, then we would work on bringing the puppy and having it in a crate, and it might be puppies in the crate with the Kong. We'd bring the puppy in, do a bit of training, he'd go in the crate, maybe in the foyer area, or and the owner might spend just that lesson working on hanging out, no training. So it's really important that you spend again equal amounts of time teaching the puppy to do nothing as you do activating it. And sometimes what I'd also with dogs that are really intent on working, and I do this in a roundabout way with equipment that I use to train. Certainly, for example, for my dogs that have done bite work. So and certainly high drive agility dogs. I will take a bite cushion or a sleeve out with me on a dog walk, and I'll hold it in my hand, and my dog will learn to ignore it. Because what I don't want them to do is to see that trigger or that equipment as the trigger to be super aroused and super focused, because I'll be building that into them parallel to this. So what I would do is when I'm doing, say, for example, a session on bite work, they'll be on a harness, okay, hence why I don't use the harnesses in other situations. So that's their uniform to say they're going to be doing the bitey game or the tugging game. I will say a specific word. My cue is bandits. We're going to play bandits, which says we're going to be doing that aspect. Because I want, when you're doing bite work, I want my dog to actively look at somebody else, and that would be something in an obedience terms I wouldn't want. So I want the dog to have that clarity. So there's the equipment which tells the dog it's okay to look at somebody else. There's the verbal cue that tells them to look at something else, and obviously they're building value for this little Hessian pillow. Now, simultaneously to that, I will take that Hessian pillow out on a dog walk. So I'm also teaching my dog that in certain situations that has got nothing to do with you. There's no point trying to grab it, just ignore it, okay? For me, that's really, really important, so that my dog doesn't just see the equipment and go through the roof. I want them to have the clarity to understand that there is times when I need you to be really, really focused on that person, and there's times when I'm going to want you to ignore it. So that same principle I can apply to rearing puppies for any sport, agility as well. If you're moving tunnels around, have your puppy milling around or eating a bone, and just move the equipment around and have the puppy in that environment, and not always being ready to do something or to be in that heightened state of arousal, because you're then conditioning it to, you're classically conditioning the dog to see that equipment and go through the roof. So it's really, really important that you run those two things parallel. Think of those, you're training two dogs, the dog that you want to live with and the dog that you want to compete with. Okay. Okay, any more questions? Okay. Okay, so I love to. Okay. Oh, hang on. It makes huge sense. I've discovered that Rue can't tug before an obedience round, not using food in my warm up, and the barking has mostly gone. Yeah, great. Simple things like that. That was something we did with Girly. She had a huge vocalization problem going through the classes, and just adjusting and using food definitely helped her. Big heart from Linda. Toti has expressed unsure in new environments, and as have I when I see the behaviour. We can add a game on cue to help. Yeah, excellent. Excellent. So much sense. She's pushing a hand of focus and equipment triggers her too. Perfect. Thanks. So, with my dogs that are that I've had that I've lacked confidence, so Sonic was a dog that lacked confidence. Scooter was a dog that lacked confidence. Those dogs definitely, I used the switch on cue to, for several reasons. One was obviously to get them in that heightened state of arousal, so they understood that when I switched them on, that was when the game was going to be caused, or the game was going to be on, and they had to give me 100% focus. The other thing is, for my dogs, the dogs certainly that were, for example, another extreme example would be my Malinois Strut. He was dog aggressive, so I created that on cue. There was what I trained him or taught him was there was a safety bubble around us. So when I said that on cue, he believed nothing would come into our personal space, and reinforcement would come from me. Same principle I applied to dogs that lacked confidence around people or dogs initially, to ensure that when I said those words, they would be in the bubble of safety. Almost, like the pandemic bubble. We had our little bubble, and they knew that we were in that bubble, but that bubble was triggered by the on cue. So how I taught that was, once the dog could respond to the on cue in my home environment, I would take it to environments where I could create distance and I could be away from people and dogs, and I would start to generalize it to those environments. And then I would deliberately have the dog in environments where there would be people and dogs, that were, the people were obviously people that I would trust and would be supportive in what I was trying to do, and the dogs were under control, and I would switch the dog on, and I would do my little engagement games or play or food circuit or tugging, and my dogs over time would develop confidence to know that when they were on, nothing would invade their space. And the other thing is, I would switch them on and not ask them to do anything that they weren't 100% confident on. So what they learned to believe over time is that two things would happen. One, when I switched them on, they had to give me 100% focus. Several things. That was one thing. Second thing is, when they were switched on, nothing would invade their personal space, and that was trained. And obviously, I would then proof that by having people move close to them, but not to the point of where the dog would be over threshold or be uncomfortable. And I would simultaneously be doing socialization and confidence building away from my sports training. So the dog believed that nothing would come near it, or a person wouldn't just walk up to them and interact with them. And third thing is, they would never be asked to do something that they weren't super confident on or with it in. So I wouldn't put big challenges in there when they switch them on. So what happens is, when you switch them on, they learn to be really super trustful of you, because they believe that nothing's going to encroach in their personal space. And they also believe that everything that you ask of them is going to be something that they can see that, which is going to succeed at, which is going to build confidence. All right. So hopefully, just some points there on words, just some finer details. Oh, let me scroll. If your dog that is very engaged with the environment, how would you train the off cue? So Claire. So Claire's question: if you have a dog that is very engaged with the environment, how would you train the off cue? So I would, as I explained with Swipe, he would be a dog that would be very naturally engaged with me, which appears to be, you think, wow, this puppy never stops wanting to do stuff. I know from experience that can be very, very counterproductive and potentially problematic further down the road. I want him to be willing to engage with the environment. And how I teach that is taking him to environments that are really, really interesting, woods, swimming, etc. Now he's naturally that's waned because he's realised that we do go for walks and he can run with the other dogs, etc. That isn't a problem. Um, but if not, I would manufacture it. So I would hide food or treats in the environment, encourage the dog to go off sniffing, and also make sure that you're not greying the lines, and being really clear about if the dog engages with you, you would have to ignore the dog to create that clarity and wait for the dog to engage with the environment. And then, rather than reinforcing the dog from you, let the environment reinforce the dog. So, simple thing: if you've got a male dog, go to where the dogs have the toiling area, a show, and take the dog and walk it around there. If the dog pushes you for engagement and tries to ignore it, just walk it around. At some point, it will notice another dog is marked or centered or going to the toilet. And male dogs are much easier because they go, oh yes, I'm inquisitive about that, and then that gets them to disconnect from you. So for me, it's really important that the dog learns to have that off switch, and another big thing that I do with my dogs is take them to places and don't do anything with them, and I just let them hang out with me and take the world in. So I tend to do that at a distance from things so that I know that the dog's going to be safe, and it's not going to have dogs or people rush up to them and invade that bubble of safety. So again, with Swipe at the weekend, I picked little spaces in the competition area, or in the main area of the show, where I knew there'd be less people, and I knew that if the dogs were around there, they would be prepping to go in to competition, so they're not going to be uncontrolled. I wouldn't take him in, for example, the exercise area where dogs could come rushing up to him. I would try and pick my optimum moments, the optimum spaces where I could take him and allow him to just hang out with me and take the world in. And I'd sit on the floor and I'm just letting him do whatever. He can clamber over me, I can fuss him, he's taking the world in. For him, when he's a little bit more like that, he's more likely to notice something. He's more likely to go, oh, what's that thing over there? Now, he's not an apprehensive dog, but he's going through a developmental stage where could definitely develop issues if I wasn't simultaneously training confidence or building confidence as well as sports training. And for him, if I produce a toy or food, the world disappears, which to a degree is something that I can fall back on if I'm in a situation where I need to get him out of dodge, or I take him to an environment, just play with him, and he's building confidence. So he's classically conditioning to be, enjoy those environments and be comfortable in them. But I don't want him to also then notice the scary man standing over there and be uncomfortable. So I'm simultaneously working on his ability to just be a dog around those environments. Okay? Alrighty. Let's have a look. Any more questions? Hopefully I haven't missed anybody out. Let's make sure. Let's have a look. Okay, make sure I'm not making. Just going to check for online, make sure I haven't thing. Question. Okay, good, cool. I think I've got everybody's questions. So again, if you have any more questions and you are you want to ask, by all means post them on this comments. As I mentioned earlier, those of you that have subscribed to the Annoyingly Adolescent webinar, you should have had that link sent through on email. If you haven't had it, just check your junk folder as the first thing. Make sure your spam folder, make sure it hasn't gone in there. Alternatively, you still haven't got it, just contact me and I will make sure that you get it. Secondly, the people that are subscribed to the OTT No More webinar on Friday, that will be coming to you guys later on this evening. I will send that out to you. So bear with me on that. Everybody that subscribes, irrespective of whether you can attend in person or not, will receive a recording of the webinar. If you have questions about the topic that the webinar relates to, by all means submit that online. Send me an email, send me a PM, and I will endeavour to answer it in the I've had several people ask questions already, so I'll answer those on the webinar. There'll be ample time for Q&As. And as I said, the recording will be sent to you shortly after. All right? All right, all. I'm going to love you and leave you. Let me just make sure I've got everything. Okay, cool. All right, all. Have a good day. I'm going to go and off and walk my dogs and train them a little bit before I've got a couple lessons, and then I will, pick up things later on. All right, guys. Love you and leave you. Have a good day. Cheers. Bye.